Morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. I'm Pete Waddingham. I'm the Net Zero lead for the HSN network. I'll tell you a little bit about myself in a second, but firstly, I just wanted to welcome you to this webinar on structuring your finances to make a green plan. If I could just ask people to put themselves on mute, sorry, just quickly. If everyone can just put themselves on mute, I've got a bit of background noise. Thank you for that. So yeah, as I said, welcome to this webinar hosted by the National Health Executive in partnership with E.on. And as I say, we'll be discussing how to structure your finances to make your green plan work. And predominantly, we're going to be looking at this through the lens of energy and infrastructure, which we know is a big area that needs to have focus on if we are going to achieve net zero. We know that the energy demands of the NHS and the supply chain of the NHS are absolutely huge, and that's what we're going to be looking at today. Yeah, we've got some brilliant speakers. I've already met them. I've stumbled across them in my role as the Net Zero lead for the HSN network, and I'm always delighted when people ask me to come and chair panels like this, because I genuinely look at them as an opportunity for me to gain knowledge and insight, and actually energy and finances is such a big area. I've been involved in previous sessions where we've shone a spotlight on this topic, but I think we probably all agree it needs a continual focus. It's not an easy topic. I was just saying to the panelist members this morning, I was listening to Radio 4, they've been talking about the funding of certain energy innovation, and actually how you need to kind of think strategically about what the right option is, and then obviously funding fits into that. And certainly I think a big topic of today will be helping you just determine some of the options that are available to fund these big projects, and hopefully we'll talk about some of the successes that people have had. This session is absolutely aimed at those that you've joined, so we'd love you to put your questions in the Q&A section on this platform. Hopefully people can find it. I'm sure we can help you if you can't. And when I introduce the panelists, if there's a particular question that you want to ask of the panelists, then please just put their name before the question. So without further ado, because we've only got an hour, and I'm sure this topic is you know, there's so much to kind of cover within it. If I think about my own sort of personal circumstances, I was just telling people, I think on a previous call, I've got solar panels on my roof. I've now got battery storage system, but actually, you know, that's been over the last sort of 10 years where I've invested in that and made those decisions. It's not been an easy journey to navigate. Funding's been a problem. You know, I've needed to look at various options. I've needed to think about what is the right solution for my personal circumstances. And so I very much kind of think that the analogy of our own personal circumstances is relevant and to the business world and to the NHS. So how do we fund these projects? What are the projects that we need to fund in to help us to achieve net zero and to help the NHS get to net zero? So as I say, without further ado, let me introduce the panel for today. So we've got Tony Orton, who's the Business Development Manager at E.on. We've got Steph Parker, who's the Senior Advisor for Decarbonisation at the Energy System Catapult. We've got James Bate, who's the Senior Project Manager for South East, the Greener NHS programme. We've got Huaran, who is the Senior Net Zero Programme Manager for West Yorkshire Integrated Care Board. And last but not least, and I'm hoping he's joined, is David Mackay, the Director of the Carbon and Energy Fund. I'm going to ask each of our panel members, just before I start firing questions at them, to give me a little sort of 30-second, give you a little 30-second blurb about what their organisation does and their role. So Dave, or David, please welcome. Glad you've joined. A little bit of background noise again. Is that your microphone, David? Just out of interest, let's just have one more. No? I can still hear background noise. Jack, I don't know if you're in the background and you can help me out. David, can you hear us?
I can, yeah, I can hear background noise.
Lovely. Okay, well, let me put myself on mute. David, give us a bit of an overview of the Carbon Energy Fund, please, first, and then I'll fire a question at you if you don't mind.
Yeah, David Mackay, Director of Carbon Energy Fund. We're an organisation created probably 12 years ago to help support trusts do energy performance contracting. So we procure, finance, arrange grant funding, trust capital, you name it, on behalf of NHS trusts. We currently probably down about 850 million. of these type of green energy projects with the NHS to help them secure. I think we've secured about 550 million of PSDS funding for hospital trusts. I also deal with contractor funding and third-party finance funding and various other stuff to help hospitals make their green plans a reality.
Lovely, thank you for that. And just for my own sort of knowledge as well, is it just hospitals that you've been working with, or are you working with the wider NHS system? Are there any community providers, mental health trust, primary care, local authority? Who else are your customer base, just out of interest?
Everything from acute hospitals down to acute hospitals with community hospitals attached, through to Northwest Ambulance, you name it. So we work across the overall piece. We do, I think with us, because we're quite a managed service, so we're probably have a minimum scale that we'd take on, because otherwise I'd say it'd be better to do it yourselves. You don't need, because we're like 40 plus people, so we're quite heavily engineering led. But we do everything from light. We also do Manchester City Council, just heat networks, through to universities, through to variety of people, really.
Lovely, thank you for that. And again, I'm sure this will come up in conversation today, but obviously the hospitals are a big consumer of energy in the NHS. You know, we know that that's a big part of the carbon footprint, but equally we need to support the entire system, and I'm sure there might be people on this call that are working in different parts of the NHS that are equally keen on this. So Dave, let me just fire a question at you, and I'm going to start really sort of basic, if that's okay, because I think there are numerous finance options for funding projects, and I want you to just talk us through some of those options in real kind of layman's terms, if you don't mind. So yeah, please explain just some of the options, and then hopefully we can dig a little deeper as we need to.
Yeah, I think through all the schemes that we've done, effectively it starts with a really solid engineering-led business case and project, and that is probably the cornerstone to any type of project, and ultimately if you're going to achieve investment or grant funding. And then the first step is obviously, if there's money within your capital budget, then you can spend on various pieces of work that fit your green plan, whatever you want to achieve as an NHS hospital or community hospital, whatever it is. That's probably your easiest source. But then obviously you get the business planning and various stuff you need to get through to get approvals and sign off procedures. Then next after that, you're into, probably not so much now, but it used to be the hospitals could effectively borrow money from NHS England direct. And then that would obviously attract capital charges and various other stuff. But that's a lot reduced, especially on energy type projects. Then you get into grant funding, and every now and again, various grants come out. Most recent one being the public sector, SALIX Public Sector Decarbonisation Scheme, which had effectively free money for these type of projects, as long as you meet the criteria. And over the last year, it was free money, but your trust had to contribute 12%. There is still, I think, there's a revolving credit facility within SALIX, so you can do some smaller scale stuff. And until recently, there was the ability to get SALIX loans, which are effectively hit the carbon targets, and you could borrow money, pay the money back, was interest free, but you had to pay it back in 4 years, which often made it difficult because what scheme actually pays back in 4 years. Then there's other types of grants out there, like the Green Heat Network Fund, which is another government fund of about 312 million, which looks at funding heat networks and low carbon heat networks as well. And then you get into the stage of, once you've exhausted those or mixed those together, then how do you fund? And that's the reality of where I think the NSS at the minute. Is there capital to fund the projects? Is there grant funding to fund the 1.4 trillion that the government has predicted it needs to actually to get to net zero carbon? And then with the point of, can the project fund themselves? And that could be done through third-party finance or funding direct from the contractor. And if you have a contract method to do that in a way that meets with the criteria for the NHS, then that can work as well.
Lovely, thank you. I think if it's okay, we'll probably start unpicking, as I said, some of these options in a bit more detail from some of the other speakers. And again, in kind of real sort of layman terms from my perspective, it sounds like obviously I can, there's grants where I can be effectively given money, which is brilliant. And I know that some of those grants have different requirements. They might fund the entire amount. They might fund, 80% of the project, and people have to, put some of their own money in, etc. Borrowing, like, many of us do in our personal lives, borrowing from a bank, borrowing from institutions. And then obviously things like where you've got maybe your own money as an entity. And as I said, there's lots of other kind of permutations, I think, within there as well, of options about how we can finance this. And as I said, I'm hoping we'll get into some of these discussions today from some of the other speakers, and start thinking as well about, like you say, you can mix and match some of these options. So that might come into strategic planning, that we'll get into the discussion. But I'm going to hand over to Steph next. You've mentioned, Dave, around the SALEX funding, the public sector decarbonisation scheme. And Steph, I just wonder again, please, if you can introduce yourself and a bit about the Energy Systems Catapult, but then I wouldn't mind just kind of getting your experience around the SALEX funding, because it seems to be a big source of funding for what I've seen originally. I mean, it's one of many options potentially, but it certainly seems to be one that's secured a lot of investment at the moment. So yeah, please introduce yourself.
Hi, thanks, Pete. So hi everyone, my name's Steph Parker. I work, as Peter said, at the Energy Systems Catapult. So the Energy Systems Catapult is part of the Catapult network. We were set up by government in around 2015. We're a not-for-profit company, so we are separate to government, but we get a core grant from government. I'm just giving you this context so you kind of know, I guess, where we fit in the market and what we're trying to achieve. So we are a not-for-profit, but we're governed by our impact rather than our revenue. So although we have to kind of wash our own face, I guess, we're not there to make money, we're there to have impact in the sector. And Energy Systems Catapult is obviously all about the transition to net zero. So my role within that is predominantly working on public sector decarbonisation. So how can the Energy Systems Catapult support the public sector to decarbonise at the scale and pace that it needs to reach net zero targets, and also align with its own internal targets? So for example, the NHS is very ambitious 2040 target. So how do we do that? Well, one thing I want to talk about is something called the Public Sector Decarbonisation Guidance, which was published in March this year. So that's a new resource from the Energy Systems Catapult, and that is directly funded by the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero. So that is a sort of government funded programme, and it's there really to help complement the SALEX funding, which I'll come on to in a minute. But we also seek funding to solve other problems that the public sector might be facing. So we have a couple of other projects that I can talk about later. But essentially, what we are trying to do with the public sector decarbonisation guidance is really help people understand the entirety of their decarbonisation journey. And of course, funding is a really critical part of that. So I guess going back to what David said around having a really solid engineering proposal and a project to start with that you're seeking funding with, our guidance is broader than that. So it sits across 7 themes, starting with strategy, working through feasibility and design, into procurement and funding, and then onwards through installation, commissioning and handover, and monitoring and evaluation. And what we've done is provided guidance around all those topics at quite a high level, designed to help people who are maybe a bit newer to the topic, or to give people who have more experience the reassurance that they're thinking about all of the elements that they need. And what we're really trying to do with the guidance is build capability, build capacity, and help people kind of understand the journey and where they need to start thinking about funding, and how they can better prepare themselves, I guess, to be successful in seeking funding through any of these routes. Making the case for investment from internal budgets, because obviously you're still in a competition with what other people want to spend money with, or indeed going to SALEX for potentially low carbon skills funding or public sector decarbonisation scheme funding. Shall I stop there, Pete? And if you've got any more questions or anything you want me to elaborate on?
I might probe a little bit, actually. I mean, it'd be great if you can put it in the chat, actually, the link to the the guidance.
course.
I think that might be quite useful for people to start monitoring. It'd be good to know whether you've had much uptake, whether you even monitor actually uptake of the guidance. How do you assess whether people are using it, getting any feedback? That'd be really helpful to know. As well, it sounds like a great document, and I think again you've touched on a couple of things that we are going to talk about today about sort of strategy and planning, because it's very easy to kind of jump in feet first, but actually a bit more of a strategic thought out process is probably the right approach, and I'm certainly going to be coming on to James to talk about that in a second. So yeah, I mean, it'd be good if you could put it in the chat. And yeah, do you know, just out of interest, do you know if people are, is that guidance document being well used at the moment? Is there any sort of?
Yeah, so that's great. I probably wasn't totally clear. So yeah, so we launched in March. There's actually 35 plus tools and templates and guides up on the website. And there's a main guide for each of the 7 themes, and then there's supporting content. We've done some short videos that introduce the themes. And yeah, we're monitoring it really closely thanks to a fab teammate who does all the clever stuff. So we've had about 2,000 downloads since March of the tools and templates. We know which ones are more popular. We can get all that data. So yeah, we're really chuffed, to use a good northern expression, about the uptake. I did have a quick look at the data before I came on. So far, we've had about 15 NHS trusts downloading documents. So in terms of kind of penetration in the NHS, there's still a long way for us to go. And we're actually doing, hopefully, some webinars with NHS England in the next couple of months. We're also, at the moment, planning to send out this week some surveys that may land in some of your inboxes to get some feedback. So yeah, we're really keen to get feedback. So I will put the link in the chat, or make sure everyone gets it afterwards. We've got a web email. You can email us. Yeah, we'd love to hear feedback. And we are funded this year to continue to expand that resource. We think we're probably going to do quite a lot around procurement, which is obviously intrinsically linked to funding. But yes, it's an ongoing resource that we keep developing. So yeah, thanks for the follow-up question. Very helpful.
No, well, thank you for that. Sounds great. Sounds like you're getting some great impact. And again, I know that we've talked about Salix, and I've talked about Salix to individual trusts. I think at times it's not the easiest thing to bid for. It requires a little bit of forward planning. Again, we'll get into that discussion with strategy. So I'm really glad that you're getting some impact with that. Let me hand over to Tony. Tony from E.on. Again, if you just wouldn't mind introducing your role, and then I want you to just reflect on what we've heard so far in terms of some of the funding options, but maybe give an E.on perspective of what other potential sort of ways of funding energy infrastructure projects could be from an E.on perspective. So morning, Tony.
Yeah, morning, Pete. Good to see you again, and every panel, and obviously people who joined the call. I appreciate your time, or taking your time to listen to us today. Yeah, working within the business to business solutions division of E.on. E.on, as most people probably know, is one of the big 6 in the UK. Predominantly, it used to own power stations, it used to own wind farms, and I think the focus now is, for the next 5 to 10 years, if not a bit longer, is to focus on sites now in terms of customers and offering, as you say, Pete, planning expression. We do have a lot of money available within the business and are always looking on a project by project basis. And because we have separate divisions within E.on, you know, as most people probably do know, we have 9 million customers that we supply electricity to in the UK, and we have 55 million customers across Europe as well. But that's mainly supply, and where we are now predominantly looking at solutions, predominantly net zero. We have worked very closely with the Carbon Energy Fund, me personally, for the last sort of 14 years now. So I fully understand the framework that David mentioned, and I've been involved in a few projects, and there's one at the moment that is quite exciting that we can expand on a little bit later. And also work with myself personally, work with the energy systems people as well. Again, transforming the NHS estate and looking at, as David said, a range of technologies, all non-clinical, And we have got, like I say, massive growth targets to expand the business over the next couple of years. That's in terms of employing more people with the right skills, that then we can deliver these projects for the NHS. And what we also do have is separate divisions within E.on. So we do have experts looking at traditional technologies like the LED lighting. Obviously, we've still got CHPs that we're still looking at, and we're looking at obviously the future of hydrogen, and now that compares to funded schemes for the NHS in the future. But we do also offer the design and installation of EV chargers, electrification of that. We're looking at hydrogen, or mentioned that, geothermal, and also predominantly a lot of people are starting to consider heat pumps seriously. A range of them would be, air source, ground source, and also water source. So we do have experts within the business, and like I say, we do look at on a project by. We do have our own controls division as well. So depending on who's on the chat, depending on the size of the opportunity, I think we can look at very small projects in terms of looking at how we could potentially fund those down to the £100,000 sort of limits. But up to, as David knows, we are starting to think about projects that could exceed 50, 60, 70 million pounds. So what we're really predominantly interested in is looking how that funded solution can be structured. But really, what we're really interested in with these people on the chat is a long-term partnership. So we all know we've got these targets in the NHS of 2028. It's been mentioned 2032 and 2040. As a business, what we want to do is, as technology changes, and as obviously the funding opportunities changes as well, is help these people on the chat to make they come up with the right solution, because we're fully aware that the NHS not only struggles with resources in terms of labour and skills, but it does massively suffer with lack of capital as well. But as David mentioned, predominantly for the last couple of years, most of the projects that we've been looking at have been by the government through the PSDS Decarbonisation Fund. But we are getting to find out now that a lot of the NHS is getting a little bit concerned about the process and all the work they need to do to get to even put an application in and then get rejected to say you've not got the. What our role is in life, mine predominantly, is to say, well, if you don't get that grant, there is other options that you can consider, depending on the technology and the size of the project. The E.on will be welcome to sit with these people and obviously kick off and start looking at different technologies, Pete.
Well, that's good. Again, let me explore that a little bit further, because I'm sure people's ears picked up when people hear you say that E.on are sat on some cash of varying degrees up to the millions. And I think there's a couple. There's a question in there around capitalizing software costs to get them off the balance sheet. And I think also we want to maybe again just talk about how people can structure their finances a little bit more. So in terms of software, we could link that to the energy. There's probably a lot of software that goes into kind of energy infrastructure as well. But if we think more macro level, I think people still need help and guidance thinking about what the options are. So again, going back to kind of like your offer to Ian, how do we help people just really think about whether that partnership is the right thing to do? How can we just have those honest discussions so people are able to access the information, the knowledge, see what's available? I'm going to ask that question of you, Tony, then I might come back to you, Steph, and just think about that in terms of like guidance. How do we give people the knowledge that they feel comfortable that these are the different options? And as I said, I think it's a mixed method of options, isn't it, that we need? If I think again from a personal perspective, when I got solar panels, effectively that's what I did. I entered into a partnership with a company who paid for that installation system. It didn't cost me money. That's what they did, but they got my roof space and the benefits that bring, and I got something for it. So I entered into that partnership. So how do we help people find out more about these partnership opportunities in a transparent way and that doesn't make people nervous? So I'll ask that question to you, Tony, and then I might come to you, Steph, if that's okay. And then I might come to you, David, with the same question, please, from your perspective.
Yeah, no, it's a good question, that, Pete, because I think it's from where E.on's coming from and how can we help people. I suppose it's, dare I say it being independent. What we're not trying to do is sell a particular product or solution to the people in the chat or the people on the call. It's really, as you say, Pete, how do we do that? Because we are, technology agnostic. It's thinking about, because obviously we've got to think about most people, especially at the moment, where we always talk about energy, is how do we come up with a solution that doesn't cost them any more money? And that's the real big challenge, because we all know we want to save the planet. We will save the planet, and we'll start introducing and transforming people's buildings, and we then have to try and do that in like you say, in an affordable way, because I think the technology is there. It's just making it financially possible or commercially viable. And I think the only way you can do that is having the opportunity to engage with the right, with each of these trusts, healthcare, social care, the mental health people, engage with the right people, the stakeholders, maybe even target the chief executive initially, maybe the directors. But I think having an open and honest discussion with all the stakeholders within these organisations about what's possible, and then, as David, I'm sure Stephanie will talk about this, is then bringing the right experts to that conversation to enable, as you say, because it's all about inertia. And I think we all know 2032 isn't that long away. We can think, oh yeah, we'll do it the year after. I think you've got to start planning now to know what is available, and then bringing the right people at the right time to talk to the right people.
You're right, and if I mean, again, some of the things that you've touched on there, I think we probably need to just elaborate on in a bit. But there are a few things, and again, if I think about the Radio 4 program that I was just listening to this morning, they were talking about heat pumps, but actually the fabric needs to be thought about before the heat pump as well. There's some strategy and some plan of what's right for that building, what's right for that infrastructure, and then we get into the finances. But going back to what I think we're talking about at the moment, it's very much, and if I think back to my career as a procurement manager, we're effectively wanting some market engagement, some open and honest, transparent market engagement to help people navigate which things that could be complex or different options. Steph, let me come back to you just in terms of your guidance. How do you help people think about where market engagement might fit into this picture?
Yeah, thanks. I think it's a really good point and something that we can definitely improve on in the guidance. So again, I'd echo the points around all these decisions and engagements are much easier if you're standing on a really firm strategy that the senior people in your organization are bought into, because that gives you the boundaries of what you're trying to achieve, and you can build that consensus, right? You agreed to a strategy that said this was our aim. I'm now coming to you with options to help you fulfill that aim, and there's risks and benefits to each of those. So there's something about going through that process and making sure in a way you're standing on firm footing when you're presenting these options, and that people can see how they fit into the big picture. I think in terms of our guidance, what we've done last year is laid the foundations, and we talk a lot about what you should do. So the guidance is structured around action. So actions in these themes, we need to build in more of that how rather than just telling people what. So I think that's definitely some feedback that I'll take away. We do have a guide around stakeholder engagement that's specific to that helps you think about all the people you might need to engage. So that's a good place to start when thinking about any options. Have I thought about all my different kind of people who have an interest? Because my experience of doing this sort of thing, not decarbonisation projects, but my previous life as working in government, is you only need to miss one senior stakeholder that pops up at the last minute with a kind of legitimate risk, and it can derail things that have otherwise been really well thought through, and I think being honest about the risks and benefits of any approach that you're suggesting and laying it out there for your decision makers is really critical, because without that you don't get the confidence.
Thank you. As I said, I'm James. I am definitely going to come to you in a second to talk strategy, if that's okay. And Huaran as well. Thank you for waiting patiently. Let me just hand over to Dave quickly again, just to get your perspective, Dave, on engagement of the market and the options again. How are you as a carbon energy fund helping trust? Are you taking care of that engagement, those options? What's your kind of take on the discussion we're having so far?
Yeah, Pete. I mean, that is just our day job, really. We've had multiple frameworks over the period of time. We currently have 3 frameworks, which are more the infrastructure-led framework, which includes people like E.on, Centrica, CBRE, Vital, Veolia, all the sort of people, anyone who's anyone really in the sector in the UK and Europe, they're part of the framework. We also have a framework for geothermal. We also have a framework that includes, we're doing like 6.5 megawatt solar project with council into New Cross Hospital and various other stuff. So what we do is we typically get involved anything up to a year before it even goes to market, where we go through everything from feasibility, board governance, business case writing, strategic outline cases, all the way through dealing with head of finance, head of procurement, you name it, get all the risks out of the way at the early stage discussions. And then with the feasibility, we put for what we minimum we think that project is, or what this number of projects would be, where it sits on the green plan where you want to achieve 2040. And then we go to the market and we procure under that basis. So everything is totally open, but is open book. The contractors will put forward in competition, and it's under for UK contract law, NSS procurement law, you name it, to ensure that they have a potential partner that could deliver over to net zero by 2040. And the hospital, we support legally, financially, engineering-wise, project management-wise, ensure the hospital has the ability to make that decision, because so that's sort of the core of what we do. There's so much else there at the minute where we're starting to go a bit, the NHS is facing stuff which is a bit off beam really, because now we're talking about geothermal, hydrogen, you name it, all this stuff which could potentially people out there that want to sell back into the NHS. So you've got to make sure you're getting the best value for money and all that, but they're not offsetting their development risks back into you as a hospital. So there's a lot that needs to be managed. Then also with the contractors, even if they're putting forward their own money, internal cost of funds are significantly different than third-party cost of funds. It's all, and trust cost of funds and grant cost of funds, because we have got grant cost of funds. But that all has to be all assessed to ensure that the hospital or community hospital, whatever it is, gets the best ability. And it's easy to say it in 2 minutes, but it's probably a year's worth of work and a year's worth of procurement, and then a year to 2 years worth of construction and a 15-year, 20-year relationship.
Yeah, well, no, and again, it's good to have that honest sort of timeline as well, isn't it? And I think, yeah, as I said, from my experience, what I often find is that people don't bid for money because they haven't done that strategic planning, and then they almost feel like the funding envelope is too short and it's all rushed. And I kind of step back and think, well, actually, that maybe is more of an indication that you haven't done the planning. And I had this conversation yesterday, not about energy but just innovation in general. Let's think about what we want to do from an innovative perspective, and then let's think about the funding options after that. James, let me come to you again. Please just introduce yourself, James. So thank you for your patience. Just tell people a little bit about you and your role, and then we will get into a question again from your perspective about strategy planning, the allocation of what's quite finite resources, if that's okay, James.
Hi everyone. So my name is James Bate. Apologies about the husky voice. I spent the weekend at Glastonbury Festival, so still somewhat recovering, to say the least. So I work for NHS England as part of one of the 7 greener NHS regions as the senior project manager. So we largely work quite closely with integrated care boards on the delivery of their green plan. But I also lead on estates and facilities and travel and transport as well. So all of the emissions associated with our operations, the built environment, and how we travel to site. So obviously how we finance many of the necessary projects and initiatives to decarbonise the state is challenging, but hopefully I can provide some tips and some advice today.
What's your perspective on like the strategic planning with these resources, and again, give it, if you can, give us a flavour from a sort of regional and a system perspective, if you can.
Yeah, sure. So we have largely financed and allocated capital to sustainability in a reactive sense. It's done very locally. Trusts have done it on a trust-by-trust basis, and it's been very reactive. We've heard today about funding mechanisms such as the Public Sector Decarbonisation Scheme, which is one big pot of money where the NHS competes with local authorities, which competes with schools. We've got trusts 5 miles down the road competing for the same amount of money. It doesn't make sense, in my opinion. We need to be be more predictive, and we need to be less reactive. Because at the end of the day, we're all trying to achieve the same thing. We're all trying to decarbonize our heating systems. We're all trying to improve the way that we are energy efficient, whether it's retrofitting, improving our cladding, our windows, or installing heat pumps or installing on-site generation. We're all trying to achieve the same outcomes to the same deadlines. So let's work a little bit more collaboratively. Now, when it comes to strategic planning, I believe the real opportunity here is to work at a more aggregated level, whether that is across the integrated care system or even across the region. We need to properly map out what the projects are to decarbonize our estate at sort of a macro and a micro level. Now, this can be part of the heat decarbonisation plans that every trust is developing, or it could be part of the ICS estate infrastructure strategies, which again, every single ICB is currently put together. We need to have a list of all of the different projects on a site-by-site basis on what we need to decarbonize, whether it's de-steaming, whether it's removing our oil fuel heating systems, or whether it's, like I said, installing solar or installing LED lighting systems. We really need a whole big list of what the different projects that we need. What's the impact that it's going to have? So how much carbon is it going to save? What's the return on investment? So for example, when it comes to LED lighting, it makes complete sense from a monetary perspective. But again, less than 50% of our hospitals have LED lighting installed. It doesn't make any sense, right? So we need a big long list. We need to say, what's the carbon impact? What's the return on investment? How much is it gonna cost us in the immediate term? And how much is it going to save? Once we have that on an aggregated basis, when the capital becomes available, we can then allocate it accordingly to the projects that's going to have the biggest impact. And we need to do this collaboratively across the wider integrated care system. Now, there's been a couple of comments about primary care as well. And I think it's just important to mention this. Again, when we talk about estate decarbonisation, yes, we talk about the big acute because they have the biggest carbon emissions associated, but we should not forget community and primary care too. They are 24% of the wider NHS carbon footprint, and it's a lot more complex. The ownership models of primary care are very difficult to navigate and manage. The NHS acute, yes, you've got PFI systems, which makes it difficult, but in primary care, we generally don't understand what energy tariffs different primary care buildings are on, who actually owns the buildings, and where we are able to install solar or EV chargers on site. So again, we shouldn't forget about it because it's complex. Surely we should be giving more attention to them because they are going to be more difficult to try and influence later on down the line. Now, for me, let's not just talk about the problems, let's talk about those solutions. There are some things that we can do around primary care. Energy is the number one for me. If we are talking about finance, we really need to talk about energy, because if you can be more energy efficient, if you can save on money, then that then allows you to allocate more capital further down the line because you're making the savings here. So around energy and primary care, I would say look at PPA contracts. Can we aggregate PPA contracts across a primary care network? And can we look at actually installing sort of half-hourly meters rather than just signing off an annual contract after a year without actually looking at how much energy we've used? Let's actually looking at a more sort of granular level and trying to, I don't know, be more preventative about the energy that we use rather than be more reactive and say, this is how much energy we've used, let's sign it off. And
Lovely. You've given us lots to think about there, and I'm going to come back and probe in a bit, but I'm going to bring Hawara in because, again, I want to make sure all of our panelists have the opportunity to introduce themselves. And actually, Hawara, I wouldn't mind you just following on from some of James's discussions around PPA and some of the managed service contracts that you might be seeing with wider stakeholders. James talked a lot there about collaboration and linking up some of these plans, which I'll come back to myself in a minute. But Hawara, introduce yourself, please, and then, yeah, we'll get into some questions.
Good morning. I am Hawaran Hussain. I'm the Senior Net Zero Programme Manager based in North East and Yorkshire. I cover the West Yorkshire patch with the ICB at the moment. Within my patch, I've got 6 hospitals, 3 mental health trusts, 1 community trust and an ambulance trust. Generally, I see my role as support, cajole, cattle prod, hold hands, but mostly be there for people when they're looking at implementing their green plan and the actions they've identified within that, and that's the wider green plan as a whole. But yeah, I think I'll go with, sorry, did you want me to talk about, I suppose
let's follow on from James's discussion around collaboration with local authority. The one public sector structure, I think, is something that you'd mentioned to me the other day. Just give us a feel about working in collaboration with local authorities, universities. I'd also like you said, if you've got any thoughts on.
I feel at the moment it just feels like we're quite inward looking within the NHS and looking at limited amount of money that's available through PSDS or the Salix Fund. And I have always, and I will always, following on from what James was saying around partnership and collaboration, is to widen our scope, is to think outside of the NHS box. Not everybody has the fastest finger to get the PSDS money. So actually, how do we work with our local partners? How do we work with our local stakeholders? Within West Yorkshire, we employ over 100,000 strong workforce. We do have a lot of say in what happens. We should be working with our combined authority, our mayoral system. We should be working with our local authorities. They should be helping us. We are classed as anchor institutions within our region, within our sector, and a geographical patch. So actually, we should be having a much more closer working with them. They might not have the money, but they will have a lot of the expertise and a lot of the guidance that they can provide us and a lot of the support. And don't forget, whatever we do, if we're planning on building something, we would have to go through our local authority planning system. And if we're planning on putting in a heat decarbonisation system in, then we need to go through our local authorities to ensure that it's all consistent and the geology is right and, all of those extra stuff. So actually, I would encourage people to start building those relationships right now and not wait for your plan or your business case or 3 years down the line to actually do a stakeholder engagement. But get in there now, build those relationships and get them to help you. It's a public sector. We all work and support each other. So actually, how can we get help and support from our wider system partners? We talked briefly, somebody mentioned the feasibility or pilot studies, that there are money available there that we can access quite, relatively easily, but we can't do it as NHS. So how can we work with our, system partners and access that money? So we're
Lovely.
not.
And just let me interrupt there a second and ask you, is the role of the Greener NHS team to help facilitate those conversations, in your wider strategic role? Have we outlined to people in guidance documents that we've kind of talked about the importance of thinking strategically? Who's there to help join the dots together?
I don't think there is a guidance document saying we must work together better or we must collaborate with our local authority, partners. I think the expectation is there. And actually, for ease of implementation of our green plan, it is imperative, I would say, to work with our system partners. We can't do it all by ourselves, and we can't do it if we keep looking inwards within the NHS system. It's not written down as my role to do. It's how I see it as being implemented. So my encouragement, my networking, my contact building, and encouraging all our system partners right across the North East and Yorkshire region to say, actually, look outside and let's work together better, make life easier for us. We haven't got teams of people working in sustainability in the net zero agenda. Any hospital, if a hospital has it, please contact me because I want to know your secret. You often get, for example, one of my hospitals has a 20,000 strong workforce and they have 3 people in the sustainability or working in net zero and sustainability a team, and then you think actually there's more people ordering teas and coffees in that hospital trust than there are working on sustainability and net zero, and they're aiming to be net zero by 2038 in line with our system partners, the West Yorkshire Combined Authority. So it's actually really acknowledging the reality of it and thinking, how do we make our lives easier? PSDS money is fantastic when you get it.
Absolutely. Good. Right. Let me just have a quick look in the chat. I mean, I know there was a question around primary care that James tried to touch on. And I think, James, again, it'd be good to sort of, it sounds like the system recognises that primary care is potentially forgotten about a little bit. And actually, we need a bit of a spotlight on there. There's some complexities with it. So I think really we need strategically to keep questioning ourselves is who can offer that support. Where are those opportunities to collaborate within primary care or be part of a wider collaboration like who Aaron's talking about as well? The other question I'm going to just read out, and I'm going to see if any of the panel wants to jump in and answer it. So it says, has any work been done to address the CDEL limitations for NHS Trust? Installation of equipment onto sites will count against CDEL in terms of value and has blocked potential projects. Does anyone feel confident that they want to address that question?
I don't. I can sort of answer a little bit around it as an ex policy official. So I don't have any insider information or, but my wider reflections are. So I think what we're talking about here are the rules that mean that unlike local authorities who can kind of leverage in private finance, central government departments and NHS are bound by some Treasury accounting rules that make that more difficult. So I think that's what we're talking about. My reflections on that are that, Treasury is becoming increasingly aware of how much it's going to cost to decarbonise the public sector as a whole. And, PSDS was around end-of-life heating systems, kind of building a market for that, trying to drive down cost and understand what it takes. It's a huge amount of money in one sense, but it's also a fraction in the other, in terms of total cost and how much the public sector is going to need. So I don't know if work's going on, but I know that those conversations are raised regularly by other departments with Treasury because it has to be, well, there's two options. You fund it by general taxation through either grant schemes or by giving departments the money to do it and the NHS, or you allow them more freedom like local authorities and other bodies to perhaps work more innovatively, work with private finance providers, etc. So I can't answer the question, but it's a very important one, and it's definitely on. It has to be on the agenda, in my opinion.
Thank you, Dave. Can I ask you the sort of same question? And are there any potential workarounds? Again, building on sort of Aaron's example of working with the wider public sector. Are there any? Have you got any thoughts, firstly, on this particular question? And what could the alternative workaround solutions be in the interim?
Yeah, I think the CDL limit and RDL, very solid thing, is a major issue for hospitals. So if you're using your own trust capital, that's effectively going to impact on your CDL limit the same way it would be if you are to ban a scanner or whatever it is. It all comes under the same pot, as you guys are all aware. Grant funding, for example, PSDS and various other stuff, actually goes on the balance sheet, but it doesn't impact on your CDL limit because it's a grant. So it goes on one bit and gets negated off the other bit. So all PSDS grant funding and stuff won't impact on your CDL, even though it's on your balance sheet. So that's quite a lot of experience in that. But I think we've got to be careful because PSDS may not happen after this year. There is no commitment from anyone to do a further PSDS. And the reality of it is, last year's NHS cap was about 140 million, including VAT, for the entire NHS. So where is the money going to, I suppose, where does the money come from? Because as far as I know, is there future PSDS for energy efficiency? Can anyone answer that on this panel? I do the chief executive and stuff, and they can answer it. So we don't even know if it's there, and even if it is there, it's sort of capped to a certain level. Regarding CDL, if it was funded by a contractor, then it wouldn't. I think we've got to split out what is finance and what is financed to a project. It's slightly different as well, because if you're as a hospital borrowing money, then it will go on. That'll be on balance sheet, even on the IFRIC 12 and various other stuff. So it will be on your balance sheet. So then again, you're impacting on all the other stuff that you want to do because it's affected on your balance sheet. And will it actually get signed off is probably unlikely. And then the next step, but if the project is actually funded, the project is funding itself, and then you have a sort of PPE agreement or a PPA agreement or ISPA agreement, whatever it is, back in to the hospital, you effectively buy them as you buy utilities from E.on or Centrica, or if they buy electricity or gas. That's the PPA, and that's a lot of solar projects done under PPA agreements and various other stuff. So there is mechanisms, and I think from what we see, the whole world is starting to waken up to it now, that there is no, where you get 1.4 trillion from, and it's not going to come from off a CDL limit, really. And so we need to investigate how we do this stuff. We do stuff, for example, the New Cross was originally a council-owned waste site, which we ended up putting 6.5 megawatt of solar on it. So that was done with the council, then asked direct wire into the hospital. So we managed to do collaborations. I've also done collaborations with hospitals providing waste heat to 1,400 homes and district heat networks, and you name it. So I think the most positive thing is now a will, where before everything was very much siloed. And I think everyone's starting to waken up that they've all got a big target to hit, and to carry on working in silo, it doesn't really work very well.
Yeah.
Lovely. Also, sort of pick final point, there is the low carbon skills fund as well. I think we've got about 600k from that to help hospitals on the two sites is developing the green plan for the next stages and other stuff. So there is money out there through the Carbon Skills Fund as well. But will that carry on over next year and the following year? I don't know.
No, I think. I mean, I'm sure there was a question in the chat about people sharing contact details so people could make connections afterwards, and I'd absolutely encourage you to do that. You know, this myself included. As I said, I work for the HSN network. We do a lot of work trying to identify what the funding might be from all the different funding providers that are out there. The partners that are on these call, the panel members, will be doing a similar job. So as Dave sort of alluded to there are lots of different options. We just need to have the dialogue. I think what I'm going to sort of, because we've only got like last 8 minutes, I want us to all kind of go around and just talk a little bit about what is the kind of challenge that sort of sticks in your mind with this topic. And if it's okay, I'm going to just throw something in myself, and it kind of links maybe with what James has talked about. But the role that I do is around innovation. I was talking to 2 companies recently. One of them is looking at air purification. So the problem is that a lot of hospitals are opening up the windows in the winter for infection control and air quality, and then we're heating the building. You know, it's nonsense to do that. There's ways to have better air quality, or companies that are using IT servers to heat water that then could be put into a district heat network. There are lots of innovative solutions out there, but something that James kind of touched on that's really close to my heart is this topic is complicated and information is fundamental. So that's why I'm really interested in things like AI. How do we bring together all of this information? So I personally still think there's a challenge around knowledge and information sharing. I still think that is fundamental because that helps strategy. So I want to just throw that in as a first challenge for me. I think there's something still around data, knowing what's happening, and actually about using some of these innovative tools like AI to help us with this complexity. So that's mine. I'm going to go around the room, and I'm going to go in order. I'm going to go with Huaren, actually. You're either putting your hand up because your dog's barking, or yeah, you are. Okay, I'll maybe give you a few more seconds.
No, dog's barking. I wanted to come in just because I wanted to follow on from what you said about information sharing. I mean, the CDL, the power, the PPS stuff, I don't feel like I know enough about it to expertly advise or, suggest any people. But actually, the NHS Futures Forum, people share and are amazingly generous with the information they hold, with the templates, the agreements, whatever. So I'm going to encourage anybody to either, if you're not already registered on the NHS Futures Forum, register yourself on it, on the Green NHS Hub, and ask it as a question, see what's happening. And there are people on it right across the country.
Sorry, Johan, thank you for that. Thanks for that plug with the NHS Futures. Just give me what your challenge is in 30 seconds, because I want to go around the room quickly and we're running out of time. So give me, in terms of this topic, structuring your finances and some of the things, what is the thing that kind of keeps you awake at night with this topic and worries you?
I think what keeps me awake is how I keep thinking, how do I get people to start thinking that we can't carry on doing what we've always done and bolt on a new bill or bolt on a new heat system or, you know, a whole new solar panel farm and expect to get to net zero. We need to fundamentally change the way we think and we do things in the NHS. And that's what keeps me awake.
Thank you. Good. You said it with a smile on your face, though, which is good. Dave, let me go to you next from Carbon Energy Fund. Then, what's kind of things that challenges in terms of this topic?
I think we've covered. I think we've covered a lot of the challenges, but ultimately, there's a legally binding target, the net zero by 2040, which the NHS signed up to. We're now in the 23. Even to get any remotely into procurement ready to go is within 2 years. One source of capital is actually potentially drop away next year. How is that, as an individual hospital, or hospital or whatever you are within the NHS, how do you actually get the ability to get the money in to do that? I suppose is the thing that keeps me working.
Good, thank you for that. So something around the speed of urgency that we need to crack on now, and actually funding again that might be dipping away, but I think as we talked about, there might be other options that we need to help people with. Tony, let me come to you from E.on then. Give me your perspective. What's the challenge in terms of this topic that you wrestle with? Two things.
One is that question from Xavier was absolutely spot on. You know, how do we? What keeps me awake at night, Pete, is how do we come up with a solution that doesn't affect that CDL limit? Because that's my biggest challenge. Technology's there, the route's there, we know the procurement route, but I think it would be lovely or really good if we could, or I could, or E.on could, speak to the trust officers, the NHS England, procurement, finance, to understand how do we all, attack that CDL limit, because Dave is absolutely right. It's there, it's a massive problem. The rules, we can't change them overnight, but I think it is something we really seriously need to start thinking about and come up with options. The NHS to improve their infrastructure. And the other one as well that I think is that you mentioned it a few times, Pete, in terms of education and getting the message across to everybody on the chat. And James knows this, because again I'm quite involved in the net zero hubs and trying to organise workshops and seminars to educate and broadcast what is available out there across the NHS zero hubs. And I also talk to, on a regular basis, organisations like High Heam and Hefner. So again, they are workshops and meetings that again you can preach the gospel to an audience about what is possible out there in terms of assisting them through the process, because it is quite clunky.
It is.
That's what keeps me awake at night.
Lovely, thanks for that. James, come to you, and then I'll finish off with Steph.
Yeah, for me, the problem is prioritisation. So we've got backlog maintenance nearly hitting 10 billion. We've got buildings falling down. What's the point putting solar PV on a roof that's going to fall down in 5 years' time? So again, it's how can we align decarbonisation with competing priorities? How can we ensure that decarbonisation and sustainability are weighted within business cases so that it's deemed the priority? This is a very tricky landscape that's got to be managed across finance, procurement, estates, and sustainability teams. So it's that alignment across those various areas that is really, really required.
Lovely, thank you, Steph.
I'm not sure I have any challenges to add to that. I think, those resonate with me, particularly the alignment point that James said, and I guess building on the points about there being enough resource within organisations to really drive this. That's the first step, right? People at the top might know it's a priority, but do they really understand what it takes to deliver it? Even deliver an organisation strategy, let alone then have a rolling programme of prioritize projects that you're delivering. So I think just to add, I guess, a bit more flavour, that's where I would come at it.
Lovely, thank you. Okay, let's wrap up. We've got a minute to spare. I just wanted to thank the panel's members for joining today. I wanted to thank you as the audience for taking the time to join as well. As I said right at the beginning, this is probably the start of many conversations. It takes time, as Dave has nicely articulated a few times, and as we've also said here, there's many people that are here to help you on this journey. So do reach out to people. I often, I was speaking about a bookmark bar that I keep of resources that I stumble across that are really helpful for me in my job. I've got about 650 things earmarked that help the greener NHS agenda. It shows you the scale of that. That covers every single topic from energy to air pollution to travel and transport. But there is a lot of information out there. You can get bombarded with it, but sometimes the best thing to do as well is to look to people for the help and guidance. Don't be frightened to ask, don't be frightened to connect. Share some of your learning as well. I think it's absolutely fundamental. Start the conversations early, I think, is what we've heard. And I certainly would welcome more opportunities from any of the guests that have joined today and have been listening in. But if you are having these conversations in a trust, reach out to us. Let's help you. Because I think we can then help the wider system. So thank you for your time. The National Health Executive have asked me to thank SAS Software for the platform that's been used today. But yeah, thank you everyone for your time and enjoy your day.
Thank you.